Please welcome Navroop Sahdev to the stage. Navroop is the founder and CEO of the Digital Economist, dedicated to advancing technological convergence aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In 2022, she launched Meeting the Climate Challenge, the Digital Economist's first climate solutions book, with the sequel, Healing a Broken World, unveiled at the 2024 UN General Assembly. Her work fuses cutting-edge tech and economic science, reshaping the future of sustainable development and driving global impact. Welcome, Navroop.
Tim.
I'd be interested in learning about how you look at and approach ESG, so environmental social governance, and how you are arguing that it should be human-centric.
Yeah, great question, Tim. I think just as a way of a sort of a further background for our audiences today, I think it's relevant to mention that first and foremost, the most important, obviously, existential crisis of our age, sustainability, is front and center to the work that we do, right? Which again is focused on emerging tech and the way it serves the economy, and themes around governance and what have you. Now, that said, when it comes to if you look at the numbers around climate damage, I think if I'm not wrong, around 70 to 100 companies essentially do half the climate damage globally. So that's kind of where ESG becomes front and center, right? And when it comes to accountability, if you look at governments around the world, they really only have actual, implementation and execution power over their jurisdiction. So you kind of have this complex interplay of citizens on one side, or the civil society. You can sort of think of this as a triangle, and then you have governments, and then finally you have multinational corporations that kind of extend beyond these national boundaries, right? And this is part of what convolutes the climate conversation and any sort of treaty making between governments, because again, a lot of the jurisdictional shopping that happens, or again, sort of movement of goods and services and supply chains and what have you, is essentially global in nature, right? But again, that doesn't mean that we're actually able to hold them accountable, again, from a national and global perspective. Of course, there's multilateral organizations and, all sorts of trade treaties. And now finally we have, environmental clauses. I started my career at the UN Environment Program. So this is kind of what we were looking at 10 years ago. It's still early, I would say. We haven't come too far from that point onwards. And this is all to say that the conversation around environmental, social, and governance aspects of the impact of large companies, enterprises, multinationals around the globe has come into sharper and sharper focus. And so this is kind of where, our work this year, again, I'm not just representing myself and my own opinions, but in many ways, sort of the paper on reimagining ESGs that the group that's focused on sustainability within the Digital Economist has put forth. And the fact that this has become another sort of accounting measure, right? And mechanistically sort of reporting on some of these metrics that may or may not have any bearing with and to the communities that it impacts around the globe. So this is kind of the problem, if I may say, and then sort of we kind of go into the treatment of why and how this should be human-centric, because of, again, all of that I just said, which is that the communities that are impacted because of the actions of cross-border as well as domestic, whether it's manufacturing or it's mining or, any sort of agricultural activity, is more and more disconnected to A, the communities, B, in terms of involving local communities from a decision-making perspective, and then, of course, damaging the environment. Of course, you can go kind of deeper into some of the other aspects around greenwashing or double counting when it comes to carbon credits, so on and so forth. So there's like the new market mechanisms from a more economics perspective that are also kind of failing us, for the lack of a better term. And something has to change to really kind of update this to something real. So I'll pause here. Long answer to your question.
I'd be interested. You mentioned greenwashing. Why do you think it's so pervasive, and how can we break through this to have a more impactful, honest approach?
The political conversation is extremely convoluted, and that sort of opens up this opportunity for companies to do what they want to do and how they want to do it. Because there's not much of a teeth, if you may. So there's the carrot and the stick approach, right? And we know that companies and individuals respond to incentives. So you have incentives around taxes and whatnot. Now that we're in 2024, a lot of this didn't exist 10 years ago, but we still don't have actual regulation that would stop or penalize a lot of these companies. That are offering and doing critical, work around the world, right? And so you have this attitude, if you may, from a more oil and gas kind of, space, which is pump, baby, pump, right? Is kind of what we were talking about. That in anticipation of regulation, they actually double down the efforts to extract as much oil as possible. And now you can imagine that has catastrophic bearings on the environment, right? And you look at hurricanes in Florida, North Carolina, you look at, floods in Nepal, wildfires in California. And so these kind of events are direct damage and cost to the economy that it affects. Usually a natural disaster on the lower side is around $3 billion of damages. If it's more than just, multiply that number. And so it's just really important that we have those policies in place that don't allow for that greenwashing, right? And the other aspect of this is, as I mentioned before, which is jurisdiction shopping, which is if you can't dump in EU, you take that and you dump it in Africa, right? And then we have an initiative focused on Africa, and we kind of deal with this firsthand a little bit. Same for Asia, for Latin America, and I think a lot of sort of the feel good of sort of the liberal middle class, or around the world is actually, if you kind of really examine where the world is, while our standards of living are increasing, we're living longer, the damage to our only home, the planet, has only accelerated. And this is reflected in some key metrics. Again, crossing the tipping points of the planet, right? So there's 7, and we've crossed 5, if I'm not wrong. And then I think scientists added 2 more, so we're not too far from that number either. And then loss of biodiversity, 25 to 40% is kind of where the estimates range at the moment. And then you have, again, all sorts of the meat industry and demand for, very intensive, energy intensive, water intensive industries. It's only increasing. There doesn't seem to be a way to pause, let alone reverse a lot of this activity.
So most of the world's population lives in the global south, which bears the brunt of the worst impacts of climate change. How can we amplify their voices and experience to ensure that they're genuinely heard and respected in global ESG conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. Like you rightly pointed out, most of the people live in the continents that I just listed, right? Asia, Latin America, Africa, and then Middle East to some extent. And so it's also true that when it comes to the cost of climate, they are less responsible for sort of causing the long-term, if you may, the damage to the environment, right? So the carbon that's locked in the environment kind of be traced back to the early days of industrialization, which of course started in Europe and quickly taken over by the US as well, and North America. But when it comes to the aspect of including the global south, the conversation revolves around a few different themes. One is better terms of trade, right? Currently, we have very unequal terms of trade, where the global south doesn't have as much as negotiation ability as as it should have, which again is changing now. With this is kind of with the block formation and sort of initiatives around G20, et cetera, have been playing a more important role. And B is sort of the collective, or even individual country voices of a lot of the global south countries are not as powerful around the table, right? The question is who's funding these initiatives. A lot of the sort of the pledges around the transfer of technology, as well as the investment in greener technologies, is actually not materialized. So year after year, when it comes to COP processes, we see that the global south is on the table, is willing to do more, and play an important role, and in many ways leading the charge as well, right? If you look at countries like Indonesia and India, there's some very interesting not only projects but large scale implementations that actually rely on sort of indigenous knowledge, as well as local ecosystem, which much lower and carbon footprint as well as energy footprint. But we see that this sort of conundrum of at the global level, this continues to be a very sort of tricky topic around investment in technology. And B, at the local level, a lot of this is dismissed as development that has to happen at any cost, right? And so I think that's kind of where the issues are, but also where the resolution is, right? Which is that we have to keep our promises. I think that's the bottom line.
Thank you. I'd be interested in, or I think the audience would be interested in learning about the SHE framework, sustainable human empowerment, and how that framework can improve ESG reporting. So maybe you could tell us a little more about the SHE framework, and then how it can impact ESG.
Sounds good. Yes. So again, kind of as I mentioned, the ESG framework has become sort of an accounting measure, which a lot of and most of the large companies report on, but does it have bearing with the actual impact on the ground? We don't know. This is sort of the best case scenario. So what we're looking at is a number of pillars that would actually ensure that ESG is human centered, which is serving life on the planet, and again, sort of beyond humans as well, at least the way we sort of think about it. And after all, that's what technology is for, right? And progress is for. And one of the big themes is what we just talked about, which is the sort of including the global south in a meaningful way. Second is gender, which is 51% of the global population, right? And so a lot of the times, again, I don't think we have time to go into that, but the impact of climate, the impact of migration related to climate, the impact of all sorts of conflicts around that, or convoluted and overlapping with political conflicts as well. We know for a fact that women bear the most brunt of this. They pay the highest price of all sorts of prices, and they also the ones who are spending the most amount of time, energy, and efforts in mitigating a lot of this, right? Energy, for example, is a big theme, sub-theme underneath. Um, and then we talk about the inclusion of persons with different abilities, which have been basically out of the conversation until I read this paper myself, right? I'm one of the contributors and not the primary author. And I was like, wow, no one's talking about, a large portion of the global population that is just mostly absent from the conversation across the board, right? Not just climate, but you name it. And then finally, the fourth pillar is around carbon credits, which is kind of interesting, right? Interesting because we kind of see this as a market mechanism to raise the funds, to find the solutions, looking at it from a sort of a demand and supply perspective, and sort of the wealth that's coming from that, at least by multiple estimates, this is a market that would continue to grow. And remember, these carbon credits are issued against activities which are adding and contributing to the environment in a beneficial way are actually in the global south. So somebody like a British company would buy carbon credits in Pakistan because land is cheap there and plant trees there, and then sort of issue credits to its consumers against that. But again, the challenge here is that again, this is disconnected with the local communities, and B, it is we actually don't know if if this is something that is traceable and trackable, in a way that kind of continues to bear impact. And so the SHE framework is focused on these four pillars to, ensure that the core components of what, actually makes ESG anything real is in there. There are multiple frameworks, of course, different organizations have sort of issued and launched and collect data on and write reports on sort of their own ESG metrics. And, there's like a handful of respected ones, which we've listed in the paper. But these are the aspects that are missing from them. There are metrics that focus on supply chain, and there are metrics that focus on, other aspects of climate. But I think the big contribution of the paper is to kind of ensure that not only, oh, this is a small missing, sub metric that needs to be added, but the fact that this has to be rethought and reimagined and have life-centered systems in front and center. And then we do all this other sort of, data collection and what have you, because then that would make, the framework meaningful.
So in the 1 minute we have, how do you see technology supporting this framework for human-centered approach to ESG?
I mean, multiple ways. We're very technology savvy, I guess. And you can think of blockchain and digital assets as sort of providing this infrastructure technology to ensure sort of the issues that I was just talking about around, ensuring traceability, provenance. Then you can have, IoT devices, obviously, that can, ensure that when it comes to global supply chains, really the backbone of the global economy, backbone of the global trade, particularly through shipping routes is something that we can with confidence say is contributing to the environment in a positive way. And then, of course, through technology of all types, and now you have, Gen AI and whatnot, right? Contributing to various aspects, if you may, right? Where earlier the sort of simply from a technological perspective, a degree of inclusion was not possible, right? What connects us around the world now is digital tech. You may not have roof over your head in many cases if you look at the global south, but there's a mobile phone that people have. So that
well,
tool.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. Navroop, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us today, and thank all of the speakers for this section. That's going to do it for us for scaling investment in climate. And I'm going to turn it back over to the organizers. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Tim.